I'm recording this video just to make it easier to respond to comments. It's too much typing. And the pictures make it easier, I guess. So a balloon with gas in it, a bunch of molecules bouncing around, and if the balloon is tied and unmoving, then the forces are equal. There's pressure in it, so things are moving and happening inside, but that energy is contained in the system. I mean, if it was an ideal balloon in a vacuum that's inflated with air in it, they would bounce around. They wouldn't transfer heat to anything. If the balloon was ideal, we would even want to ignore the balloon. But I mean, it's elastic, so we can't ignore it. But it's a thing that's stretching, and it ends up building up more and more tension. To then there's a point where the gas balances out with the pushing outward from the molecules. So you add pressure, it gets bigger, the tension gets higher, and it balances out to be an equilibrium. You tie it off, molecules are bouncing around inside. When it's tied off, they're bouncing around inside and they're equal, because if it wasn't equal, it would move. So it has to be in equilibrium, like the top. And when you open it, I wish they didn't make the arrows bigger, but it's just so you can identify what the main point is here. But this idea that these arrows are nice, evenly spaced in a circle is highlighting that it's even all over. The pressure is even inside of the balloon. And the bottom, the pressure is still even. I'm sure there's some tiny little zone. If you get small enough, there's always a little zone where you'd be like, in this exact little cube, there's more pressure because whatever thing's happening in it at this current point in time. But in the general nature, the balloon with the opening at the back still has an equal pressure inside. The difference that has happened is now this arrow on the left, which they shouldn't have made it any bigger, is still there because there's still pressure in the balloon. It's not fully deflated. As soon as you open it, it's not an instantaneous, all the pressure's gone. Nothing like that is instantaneous. In general, nothing in physics is instantaneous. If every molecule instantly went out the hole or changed directions, that would require like infinite amount of force, and it wouldn't be possible. So that arrow on the left or the front is still there because there's still pressure in the balloon, and the respective opposite side where there's still the pressure of the gas inside of the balloon, it still has pressure. It's not colliding with any, there's a hole. So the arrow that is now what originally was pointed to the back, because the arrows are pointing to the force of collisions hitting the balloon. When there's a hole, that arrow that would normally have hit where the hole is does not hit. So this causes an imbalance of force. The front, any surface that is left, well, looking at this picture, left of perpendicular, hits the wall of the balloon and creates a force to the left. Anything to the right creates one to the right. So the arrows are all canceling out in this example, because there'd be infinite arrows, but the arrow that's directly left has no longer an arrow on the right to counteract it. The force of those molecules that were going to hit the wall of the tied off balloon now are just allowed to exit. So the overall nature of pressure is all the molecules colliding all over everything. It was an equilibrium to zero. Now their collisions allow them to leave to the right. If anything left to the right, it must have had collisions with things that pushed against the left. There's no other way to be going to the left and then end up going to the right without colliding in something and pushing to the left. So it's a imbalance of the forces. And if you're trying to connect this to why doesn't the balloon deflate weird, that doesn't make any sense. It's not a gotcha at all. I'm assuming you're like, I'm gonna read that and be like, oh my God, I never thought about that. No, not at all. The only ones that are I don't even know if I would say have an effect, that the ones that are being released are only exactly at the hole. So the stretching right around the mouthpiece is now different, and well, I don't know if I'd say right around the mouthpiece. The cylindrical part of the mouthpiece going out now tends to have molecules that are generally only going to the right, and they're allowed to leave. So that part is not blown up, I guess. So that part is not blown up, but directly inside of the hole, like can you see where I touch? I think right next to the hole, there's still the pressure there. So I don't, this idea that you're almost making it sound like, wouldn't it be weird though if you're thinking that the collisions on the front of the balloon making it go forward have some effect on the balloon, like it's gonna deflate weird. And if I think about a balloon deflating like normal, like you trip me up, I have no issue with that. It doesn't, there's no problem. And this is this is just standard physics of gas molecules, and knowing that gas is mass, which we can condense gas into liquid. So I think we're pretty comfortable saying gas is little tiny pieces of mass. If you're that far, I mean, we can talk about something else and we'll just be done. Because if you would just believe all of science is conspiracy, it's something. But someone has for teaching in like a physics class exactly what I'm talking about. Balance forces, and the inside having pressure, the force that is fighting the pressure is the tension in the balloon. So pushing out against the container automatically has it pushing back because it'll move it. Well, if it was a stiff, let's call it a stiff container, it would move the most microscopic amount where there would still be tension in the material, and that tension is pushing back on every collision that happens. And the container, if you would think of it as Brownian motion, which is like when you get small enough, you could tell that single molecules hitting things can make them move. But there's so many molecules of gas in the container that one hitting on one side at the exact same moment has one hitting on the other side. So the overall container does not move. It has motion from the fact that it has heat and there's motion of molecules. There's always motion, but the overall system is not translating in space to perform work. So it's just a balloon sitting there filled up and closed is balanced. And look, front, back, there's a reason that they're drawing two molecules. Two molecules hitting in the back has two molecules hitting in the front. It's equilibrium. You open up one side, the two molecules that would have hit the back now do not hit the back. The molecules in front, the balloon is still there, so they still hit. They're still hitting all over the balloon. There's still pressure, and the only thing that is different is the molecules that have the direction that allows them to leave out of the hole do not run into a balloon anymore. If you previously had molecules where the same amount was hitting the front and the back, which you almost have to agree with, because if that wasn't true, the balloon would just magically be moving sitting there. So we untie it. Now you have molecules, and we know there's still pressure in the balloon because it doesn't instantly turn into just a flat thing laying on the ground, and it doesn't make any sense anyway. Every molecule instantly leaving. So there's pressure in the balloon as it deflates. You can even put a small hole in a balloon and you can squeeze on it to increase the pressure. So it obviously doesn't all suck out instantaneously. I'm sure you'd bring up like, oh my God, it's different outside of a vacuum. It's not different outside of a vacuum. Uh, pressures are just relative. A pressure is just molecules colliding with things. So if you put some molecules outside of the balloon that they get to run into, it just tends to make them less likely to go out and have more trouble getting out. But it would just be the same as a relative pressure. If we did 10 psi to 0 outside, so a vacuum, you might as well do 11 psi to 1 psi in the outside. So if you have atmosphere 14.7 and we wanted the same feeling of 10 psi doing it, then we just put the balloon at 24.7. And like the mechanics of the molecules leaving is the same at the beginning. It's the same as if it was the difference of 10 to 0. And this is just, it's a simple concept of if you either think all of like gas physics is incorrect and doesn't fit together, because this picture you're looking at, there's these two things happening in a balloon are verifiable, and the math involved with testing out that these physics are correct work, and it always works. And let's say if it would be surprising when you get really into it of like weird effects of things are not ideal gases, those end up being explained too, because the ideal gas laws assume a perfect gas where points don't collide with each other, and they're infinitesimally small, but still have mass and still do things. So it's the idea. It's a starting point of the math. Looking at a representation of an ideal gas is to give you the basic foundations of knowing what gas molecules are let's call it attempting to do, because I don't know, like it's nice to think that like you shoot a laser beam and everything goes exactly the same direction and hits something. That's like the first thing you learn about a laser beam, but that's an ideal setup. You can get more complicated, but the ideal setup that is known and verifiable with math is the molecules of gas colliding with each other and with the walls of their container is pressure. When you open up a hole, there there can be math done for the properties of the gas that they leave at a certain rate. When they leave, they had to have left a collision that sent them going to the direction of the hole, and since they go out the hole, they can no longer impart any force back on the container. They imparted a force to molecules in the container that ended up having them leave, and they don't ever hit something. So making a whole system that adds up to net zero overall movement, to you would assume, well, let's call it the balloon eventually empties, because if there's a vacuum outside, eventually they all go out. If every molecule in a system that has random motion, all of them, all that mass changes direction to only go what would be past perpendicular, one direction, the only thing they could have left acting on the balloon and the, well, container is the force in the opposite direction. Every single one of those molecules had to collide in some way to go the direction of the hole, which is the direction to go out the hole. The opposite of that is forward. So they, you can't have everything in a system end up leaving and they didn't impart force to anything. If you look at a fusion, I mean, that's a like an ideal gas principle too, but it's essentially kind of what you're looking at. But they set up a container that's split in two. All the gas is in one side, there's not a hole yet, and they put a hole to a perfect vacuum. All the ideal gas laws have the dots of molecules of gas. Anything in between them that's not a dot of gas or a container is a perfect vacuum. They will bounce around in the container and it'll make it shimmy. That would be the heat of the system, the shimmying of the container, but overall not moving anywhere. When you make a hole, they leave, and the last things they did to leave, they all must have left a collision going in the other direction. It's it's very basic, and the idea that you would think, I mean, I guess you can just be in a place where you think the whole science of gas laws is complete conspiracy. So I mean, if you're there, we might as well just stop talking. So I guess that's fine. But unless you really believe that the all of the verifiable physics of the gas laws are completely mistaken, this is exactly how it works. And there's no problem with whatever example you're going to come up with. Well, why does this happen? There's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why that happens. Whatever way we see a balloon deflate, there's not going to be anything goofy about it. It's going to have something to do with the weird variable elasticity of the balloon. And yeah, the idea that the front has the push and the back where the hole, like, I feel like what you're asking me is don't you have a problem with that, since there's not pressure right on the hole, that it's not stretching the balloon there? Well, yeah, you can't stretch the hole. The hole is nothing. The lack of them not hitting the hole, yeah, that's fine. Like you're making it sound like I'm worried that the front of the balloon would have some, maybe an inflated region, and the back should be let not under pressure. I don't know. I have no issue thinking that, and I don't think that there's some I don't think it travels outside of the hole of the balloon, because anywhere that there is still balloon to hit, there's still the pressure. It's only at the hole. So yeah, a molecule flying directly out of the hole and not hitting the balloon is not creating pressure at the hole. So yeah, there's a lack of that the hole is the lack of a balloon. So I don't know if you're saying that, why wouldn't there be a stretch at a lack of a balloon? Well, that's kind of nonsense. Of course there's no stretching of a balloon at the point where there's a lack of a balloon. So hopefully I don't have to type much more for that. But if it involves just all of the gas laws and all the um, kinetic gas principles are just bogus, then I mean we should just be done, because there's no, if you think all the verifiable kinetic gas principles are just dumb and a conspiracy, then there's no point in talking. That's just what you think. So hopefully that makes it easier.